Okay, folks, our purpose here is to look at a new kind of exercise. It's called a document-based question. Essentially, what you have is you have documents that are like evidence. If you imagine yourself, for example, as a detective or an attorney making a case, you want access to the evidence room. You have pieces, artifacts like gun or DNA or footprints or something like that that has been documented or pictured, and you would use those documents to make a case either for or against the conviction of a person accused of a crime. Well, instead of having artifacts like footprints or a gun, in a document-based question, we have documents, several documents. And our purpose is to analyze the documents for the purpose of making and supporting an argument that's historical. Now, I thought we're going to be doing a document-based question on bubonic plague or the Black Death, which fits right in the period of time we're looking at, the late Middle Ages. What essentially meaning you're going to have some documents on that on the bubonic plague, and you're going to have to make some kind of a judgment and support it with claims and evidence, just as we've done before. This is a little tricky, so I want to make sure that you clearly understand because I want to go through this to give you guys an example how a document-based question is made, what are the raw materials of it, how it's made, what one looks like. Okay, so you have a question. The question for this is, what was the underlying cause of World War One? Okay, I know you've studied World War One before in the context of American history, so I thought it wouldn't be a bad idea just to kind of go back to that. Okay, so we have a number of documents. Now the documents are labeled, and you can see this is called document A right here. That's kind of important. Think of that as the old courtroom drama as Exhibit 1 or Exhibit A. These documents will need to be used and cited to make your arguments. Okay, so the first thing you get to is you'll get a general idea what the question's about, and then you have to look at and analyze the documents. Now, in this example and the example that you'll have to do, you'll have questions that will help you analyze the documents first. You need to be clearly aware of the evidence. So let's do this kind of quickly. You can see document A is a map, and the map is labeled right here. You have to be very careful looking at it. It's looking at European alliances. We're looking at 1914, which maybe to refresh your memory is the year the war began. You have a couple of alliances here, the Triple Alliance, which is in black. You got the Triple Entente, which is here in this kind of a plaid color. And this sandy color represents nations that are neutral in that alliance. So there are some analysis questions that will help you focus on this. Like this map shows the alliance arrangement in Europe in 1914 and what year did World War I start. So that it's kind of bringing you back to the fact that this alliance is something very, very relevant to the outbreak of war. And there's other questions that analyze the map and what it means, connecting it to the question. Again, the question we have to keep in mind is, what was the underlying cause of World War I? So you would need to take some time in analyzing that document. Now this is document B. Now where document A is a map, this is a primary source. It's from a newspaper, the Chicago Daily Tribune. So it's an American newspaper. The artist is John McCutcheon. And you take a close look at this. Let's see if I could make this a little bit bigger here. That will work. You got to look at this very carefully. You'll see the documents called A Crime of the Ages. Who did it? See the finger pointing, and it looks like it's coming from America. You have the Peace of Europe right here, which is a crypt. You see the dagger in the knife of the dead body, the Peace of Europe. The peace was dead. You have different caricatures of different countries of Europe. You can see the English person is pointing at Germany, as is the Russians, as is the Belgians, as is the French. You see the Austrians and the Germans are pointing outwardly. They're saying they're not pointing at each other. Again, think of that map that these two countries are in alliance. Italy, which in 1914 had not yet joined the war, is standing a bit apart from everybody else with his arms folded, not pointing at anybody. So there is a primary source. Now, I want you to consider that this picture was a political cartoon. It was not made for us to study history. It's not an exercise for us. But when people create the documents and the things that they use in their everyday lives, those documents later give us an interesting and revealing window of the history and the context from which they've come. And that's what happens here. Again, The document requires some questions. They want to know time. How soon after the war broke out was this cartoon published? And again, you can see that's right up here, August 5th, a few days after the war started. And so there's a couple of questions there, again, that ask you to contextualize and understand the meaning of that document. That's document B. Now, document C is not a primary source, but it's an analysis of the growth of armaments or the spending on military set up in British pounds. So again, you have to look at the graph. We have 4 snapshots. This is 1890, 1900, 1910, and this is 1914 at the eve of the war. So you have to look at this graph intelligently. Notice that G is Germany, A is Austria-Hungary, I is Italy, G is Great Britain, R is Russia, and F is France. The dark represents spending on the army, and this color represents spending in the navy. And you could take a look, for example, a country like Austria, being landlocked, is not spending a lot of money, or close to landlocked, not spending lots of money on a navy, where you might expect the British to spend more money. Although you'll see too, the Germans are greatly expanding their spending in the navy as we move closer to what would become the beginning of the war. So we have to look at the idea of military spending, and you can see, generally speaking, that military spending is going right up. And you can see here that Germany's military spending particularly has gone to the point where it is twice as big as some of the other countries in Europe. Almost twice as big as France. So again, you have some analysis questions in document C. Now document D, you want to read where the source comes from. This was a speech given by the German Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, Bernhard von Bülow, in the Reichstag, or the German Congress, on December 11th. Oh gosh, that was this day, in 1899. It is called the Hammer or the Anvil. Okay, so we have a speech here, and we need to read this in entirety. In our 19th century, England has increased its colonial empire, the largest the world has seen since the days of the Romans. The French have put down roots in North Africa and East Africa. Russia has begun its mighty course of victory in Asia. We don't want to step on the toes of any foreign power, but at the same time, we don't want our feet to be trampled by any foreign power. We don't ever again want to become the slaves of humanity. But we'll only be able to keep ourselves at the fore if we realize that there is no welfare for us without power, without a strong army and a strong fleet. As you're reading this, think about the spending on armaments. This was 1899, and we know this is a German speech. So let me finish. The means, gentlemen, for the people of almost 60 million dwelling in the middle of Europe and at the same time stretching its economic antennae out all sides to battle its way through the struggle for existence without strong armaments on land and sea, have not yet been found. In the coming century, meaning the 20th century, which was coming up, remember this was written in 1899, German people will be the hammer or the anvil. And you guys know that twice in the 20th century, Germany would try to become the hammer. And that's good to look at that. So then you got some questions to look at that. Now consider the hammer is that attacks and strikes. The anvil is what gets struck. Now this document E is called the German octopus. Now it's in the German language, so we could assume that in Austria or Germany, this is where this document comes from. So we see it's in German. You see the British right here, and you can see the idea of octopus or the tentacles that are stretching out. And you can see down here below are a collection of countries, a country of places, Guyana, Gibraltar, Sydney, Aden, Vancouver, Hong Kong. It represents the power of the British Navy in wrapping around the world. And there you have Germany getting sucked in the middle. And this term right here, you can see the German here, assuming we don't know German, Freiheit der Meer, which means freedom of the seas. In England, der Blutsauger der Welt. My German isn't as good as my last name. England, the bloodsucker of the world. So you get an idea of what this is attempting to look at. This is a German propaganda cartoon, and this is source E. Now, source F is a list of colonial empires. Again, if you had been studying this, you know that the British, the French, and the Germans, and all these countries were reaching out to create empires overseas. And this represents the size of this population, and this represents the population of their empire, meaning that by 1913, the Americans had ruled territories like the Philippine Islands, Puerto Rico, which is still an American territory, Alaska and Hawaii are American territories at that time also. But it represents the size and the population. So that it's a comparative look at colonization. And again, there's questions for analysis. Now, going back to this, after you analyze these questions, you have to be able to forge an argument. You have to be able to create an argument. And the steps are similar to what we've talked about before. You need to create claims or statements you could argue. And then you need to find evidence. In this case, you need to find and cite evidence from these documents to make your final case. Now, what I want to do is just kind of skip ahead to what does a good document look like. A couple of things I want you to notice is that the writer of this is a very good example of what a document-based question could look like. They're answering again, what was the underlying cause of World War I? So we have an introduction, we have several claims, and at the end we have a conclusion, just like we talked about before. But one of the things I want you to notice is how does the author cite the documents? Because that's one thing in a document-based question you must do. You cite your evidence. So the beginning is an introduction. It provides some background, and then it makes a thesis. In the end, no one was singing. World War I lasted 4 long years, from 1914 to November 1918. It was triggered by the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand in Austria. This is all background you would know, not in the documents. In a matter of 1 month, events had spun out of control. By August 4th, 1914, armies across Europe were squared off against each other. By late 1918, over 10 million soldiers and civilians were dead, and another 20 million were wounded. Now, you notice that BGE stands for the different documents that were being used. Or I guess that couldn't be G. They're citing evidence. It is important to try to understand the underlying cause of this tragedy. Along with nationalism, 3 basic causes were responsible: a network of alliances, a buildup of arms, and imperialism. It will further be argued that these imperialism was the most important of all. So you see their thesis is right here. The underlying cause of this tragedy: nationalism, a network of alliances, a buildup of arms, and imperialism. So they're going to explain and use evidence. So let's take a look at the first claim. The first claim should be in the first sentence of the second paragraph. Alliances were a key contributor to the war. Okay, so they're going to make an argument that alliances were a key contributor to the war. Europe was generally divided into 2 groups of nations. On one side was a triple alliance, Germany, Austria. The other was in a short time, Italy. On the other side was a triple entente, France, Britain, and England, Russia. Document A. See how they cite document A. So they use document A to show you what the triple alliance and triple entente are. That's their evidence. Once the conflict began, the 2 nations were at war with each other. They were automatically pulled into a conflict due to their alliance agreements. Because of alliances, a regional conflict between Serbia and Austria-Hungary grew into a war that engulfed the whole continent. Alliances help explain the death of peace in Europe. So do you remember back to the document, the death of peace in Europe? It's right here. The death of peace right there. So you talk about the alliances. You can see there they're connecting these 2 documents as evidence to how alliances were one of the reasons for the war. Okay, so now let's go on to back to the document. I'm running out of time here. So you look at the second argument. The second case is the second cause of World War I was the buildup of arms in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So look how they're going to cite. They're going to cite document C. They're going to also cite document D, the anvil and the hammer, the idea that Germany needs arms. It's all going to be there. And then the third argument is, while alliances and arm buildup are important, they don't explain what drove Europe countries to take these measures. For the answer, one must look hard at imperialism. That's their third claim. So they're going to use document F and document E to support the idea of imperialism. And that takes us to the closing. In closing, it is important to repeat that there is no single cause behind the Great War. Nationalism barely touched upon here. A key factor, alliances and arms have discussed, but the center of the horror, like a giant sea monster lurking in the depths of man's souls, was the greed of imperialism and the determination of the great powers to get or keep their piece of the pie. There you go.